A single dad helping a stranger with her flat tire, never expected she was a billionaire. Looking for someone real, and his simple act of kindness was about to change both their lives forever. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The afternoon light was the color of weak tea, thin and pale, stretching across the cracked asphalt of a forgotten two-lane highway. Ethan pulled their old minivan onto the gravel. Shoulder the engine sputtering with a final cough of protest, he rested his forehead against the steering wheel. For a long moment, the plastic warm and worn beneath his skin. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the soft sigh of the wind through the pines and the gentle hum of his own exhaustion from the back seat. His daughter Maya piped up her voice, a small bright bell in the quiet. "Is this where we're stopping for dinner, Daddy?" He looked at her in the bead rearview mirror. Her face framed by a halo of messy brown curls, her eyes wide and trusting. "Yeah, kiddo," he said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his own tired eyes. "Looks like this is it." Their world had shrunk to the size of this minivan. In the last 6 months after his wife had passed and the medical bills had swallowed their savings whole, every day was a careful calculation of miles and dollars, of finding work where he could as a carpenter and moving on when it dried up. The minivan was their home, their transport, their dining room, and lately it felt more like a cage than a sanctuary. He popped the trunk and pulled out their life support system, a small cooler, a folding table, and a battered propane stove. Maya hopped out, her worn sneakers crunching on the gravel, and immediately set to her task, arranging the 3 mismatched camp chairs with the seriousness of a seasoned road warrior. Ethan set up the stove, his hands moving with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this 100 times before. He was a craftsman by trade. His hands knew the language of wood, of joinery, of bringing something sturdy and beautiful out of raw material, but now they were just tools for survival. Opening cans, lighting burners, trying to build a moment of normalcy for a little girl who deserved a whole world of it. The sound of a slow approaching engine made him look up. A sleek silver car, so out of place on this road, it looked like it had fallen from another planet, glided to a stop about 50 yards away, its tires hissing softly on the gravel. It wasn't the car that held his attention, though it was the woman who stepped out. She was tall, elegant, even in simple jeans and a dark wool coat that looked too expensive for a dusty roadside. Her hair was pulled back into a neat knot, and she stood with a stillness that felt both composed and utterly lost. She looked at her back tire, a silent curse forming on her lips, as she confirmed what she already knew. It was completely flat. Ethan watched her for a second. More. His first instinct was to mind his own business. He had enough of his own to handle. But then he saw the way her shoulders slumped, the faint tremor in her hands, as she pulled out a phone only to stare at the screen with a look of defeated resignation. No signal. He thought, of course not. He wiped his hands on his jeans, a habit ingrained from years in a workshop, and sighed. Some things you just couldn't drive past. He turned to Maya. "Stay here." "Okay, I'm just going to see if she needs a hand." Maya nodded, already engrossed in arranging a family of pebbles on the picnic table as Ethan walked toward the silver car. The woman looked up, startled, her eyes, a shade of blue so deep they seemed to hold the dusk within them. They were guarded, wary, the eyes of someone not used to accepting help from strangers. And Ethan, in his faded flannel and work-worn jeans, knew exactly what he must look like to her. Another problem on a day already full of them. He stopped a few feet away, hands held up in a gesture of peace. "Looks like you've got some trouble," he said, his voice calm, and even she stared at him for a beat, longer than necessary, her mind clearly racing through 1,000 scenarios, most of them probably ending badly. Her jaw was tight, a small muscle flexing just beneath the skin. She was a fortress, and he was an unknown variable at her gate. "It's a flat tire," she stated the obvious, her tone clipped and cool, as if acknowledging the problem might somehow give her control over it. He nodded. "I can see that. Got a spare in the trunk." "A jack." She hesitated, her gaze flicking from his face to her car, then back again. "I think so." She said the words laced with an uncertainty that betrayed her polished exterior. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the ingrained suspicion warring with the practical need for help. He wasn't offended, he understood it. The world taught you to be careful, especially a woman alone on a deserted road. Let me guess, he said, a faint smile touching his lips. No cell service. She let out a short, humorless laugh. Is it that obvious? He shrugged. This road isn't exactly a tech hub. Look, he added, gesturing with his chin. I'm not looking for anything. I've just got a kid over there who I'm trying to teach that you help people when they need it. That's all. He turned to walk away, giving her the space to make a choice. He didn't expect her to call him back, but she did wait. She said, her voice softer. Now, less defensive. The walls were still there, but a small gate had just creaked open. I think the jack is under the floor mat in the trunk. I wouldn't even know where to start. Ethan nodded and walked back, a silent agreement passing between them as he got to work. He didn't know her name, he didn't know her story. But for the next 20 minutes, in the fading light of a lonely highway, they were just two people, one with a problem and one with the hands to fix it. And sometimes that was more than enough. The trunk of the car opened with a soft hydraulic hiss, revealing a space as clean and organized as a surgical suite. A single, leather duffel bag sat in the corner beside a perfectly folded cashmere blanket. There were no stray wrappers, no forgotten water bottles, no signs of a life lived in motion. It was the trunk of someone passing through, not someone living on the road. Isabella, or Bella, as she preferred to be called, though no one had called her that. In years watched as Ethan lifted the floor mat to reveal the spare tire and a set of tools still sealed in their original plastic. She had owned this car for a year and had never once considered what was beneath the floor. Her life was managed by others, drivers, mechanics, assistants, people paid to handle the details, so she wouldn't have to now standing on the edge of a highway with a man whose hands were calloused from real work. She felt a profound and unsettling sense of incompetence. He worked with a quiet, focused grace, his movements economical and sure. There was no wasted effort, no hesitation. He talked her through what he was doing, not in a condescending way, but like a teacher, sharing a skill, loosening the lug nuts, jacking up the car with a steady rhythm, pulling the flat tire. Free Bella stood by her arms, wrapped around herself, feeling useless. She should have offered to help, but she didn't know how she should have made small talk. But the words felt hollow. What did a woman who spent her days in boardrooms say to a man who fixed things with his own two hands? Instead, she found herself, watching his daughter Maya, had abandoned her Pebble family and was now drawing in a small notebook. Her head bent in concentration. Every few minutes, she would look up, catch her father's eye, and give him a small thumbs up. He would always smile back, a genuine, unforced smile that softened the tired lines around his eyes. The connection between them was a silent language, a bond so palpable. It made the air around Bella feel thin and cold. She had more money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes, but she would have traded all of it for a fraction of that warmth, for the simple certainty of knowing someone in the world saw her, saw the real her, and smiled just because she was there when Ethan tightened the last lug nut on the spare. He stood up and wiped his hands on a rag he pulled from his back pocket. Good as new, he said, though the spare was smaller. A temporary fix, well, not new. He corrected himself, but it'll get you to the next town. There's a good garage in Oak Ridge. They'll have a replacement for you. Thank you, Bella, said the words. Feeling inadequate, she reached for her purse instinctively, her fingers closing around the cool leather of her wallet, a gesture so ingrained it was almost unconscious. How much do I owe you? Ethan looked at her, and for the first time since he'd started working, he seemed to pause his gaze. Wasn't unkind, but it was direct, searching. You don't owe to me anything, he said. Finally she blinked, surprised. But of course I do. You spent your time, your "A decent human being isn't a billable hour," he said, turning to put the tools back in her trunk. "Besides, you'd be surprised what a simple thank you is worth these days." He closed the trunk and handed her the plastic-wrapped tools. "I'd recommend learning how to use these," he said with a hint of a smile. "You never know when you'll be on a road with no signal and no here. Carpenters passing by with—" That he nodded once, and started walking back toward his minivan and his daughter, leaving Bella standing by her immaculate car, feeling a strange mix of gratitude, relief, and an emotion she couldn't quite name. It felt a little like being seen, and a lot like being left behind. Bella watched him walk away, his silhouette, framed by the setting sun that cast long shadows across the highway. He didn't look back. He just rejoined his daughter at the well-end. Picnic table ruffling her hair as he passed. The small gesture of affection hit Bella with an unexpected force, a dull ache in the center of her chest. She should have gotten in her car and driven away. That was the plan. That was always the plan. Keep moving, stay anonymous, don't get attached. But she found herself rooted to the spot. The keys felt heavy in her hand, the hum of her own expensive engine, a stark contrast to the quiet intimacy of the scene just a few yards away. She saw Ethan light the small stove again, the blue flame flickering to life in the deepening dusk. He said something to Maya, who giggled and clapped her hands together. It was a small world they had built for themselves, right here, on the edge of nowhere. A world of two that felt more complete than anything Bella had ever known. She thought of her own world, the one she had run from a penthouse apartment in the city with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a million lights, but felt like a beautiful cage. Boardrooms filled with men in sharp suits who smiled while they calculated her worth, assistants who managed her schedule down to the minute but didn't know the first thing about her she had left it all behind, seeking silence, seeking space. But what she had found was a profound and crushing loneliness, an emptiness that no amount of open road could fill. She slid into the driver's seat of her car, the leather cool against her skin. The dashboard glowed with a dozen polite notifications. A missed call from her father, another from her chief of staff, an urgent email flagged in red. She ignored them all. Her gaze drifted back to the picnic table. Ethan was spooning something from a pot onto 2 paper plates, mac and cheese maybe, or some other simple roadside meal. Maya was watching him with an expression of pure adoration. It was so simple, so unassuming, and yet it felt more real, more substantial than any 5-star meal Bella had ever been served. She started the car, the engine purring to life with a quiet confidence that felt like a lie. She should drive west toward the coast, find a new town, a new stretch of highway, but her hands? He wouldn't turn the wheel. Her foot wouldn't press the accelerator. Instead, she turned the engine off, the silence rushing back in to fill the space. She didn't know what she was doing. She only knew that driving away from this small circle of light felt like driving away from the first real thing she had seen in years. She took a deep breath, got out of the car, and started walking back toward them, her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs, a rhythm that sounded suspiciously like hope. Ethan looked up as she approached, his expression a mixture of surprise and caution. He had expected her to be miles down the road, by now a silver glint disappearing into the horizon. Instead, here she was, walking back into the small circle of light cast by his camp stove. Her hands were tucked into the pockets of her coat, her posture uncertain. My car, Bella started, then trailed off, realizing the excuse was flimsy. Even to her own ears, she took a breath and tried again with the truth. "I didn't want to drive in the dark on that spare tire," she said. It wasn't a complete lie. It just wasn't. The whole truth. Ethan studied her for a moment, his eyes moving from her face to the darkening sky. He didn't call her on it, he just nodded. "That's smart. This road gets tricky at night." Maya, who had been watching their exchange with wide, curious eyes, piped up. "You can have dinner with us. My dad makes the best hot dogs. He burns them a little, but that's the good part." Ethan shot his daughter a look of mock betrayal, but a small smile played on his lips. "We've got enough," he said, gesturing to the empty camp chair. "It's not much, but you're welcome to it." Bella hesitated for a fraction of a second. The invitation was so simple, so genuine, it disarmed her in her world. Every offer came with an agenda, a hidden clause, a silent expectation of reciprocity. But this was just kindness. She found herself nodding before she had even fully decided. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer than she intended. I'd like that she sat down in the third chair, the metal cool beneath her, and watched as Ethan placed a hot dog on a paper plate and handed it to her. There were no linen napkins, no crystal glasses, just the smell of pine and campfire smoke, and the company of two strangers who had offered her a place at their table without asking for anything. In return, for the first time in months, Bella didn't feel like she was running. She felt like she might have just arrived somewhere. The hot dog was exactly as Maya had described it, slightly charred at the edges, nestled in a plain white bun with a single line of mustard drawn down the middle. Bella took a bite, and the simple taste of it, the smoky flavor, the soft bread was a revelation. It wasn't about the food, it was about the moment, the shared warmth in the cool night air, the quiet crackle of the stove, the easy rhythm of conversation between father and daughter. They ate in a comfortable silence. At first, but Maya, a natural diplomat, couldn't let it last. "So, what's your name?" she asked, her mouth too full of bun. "I'm Maya. And this is my dad." Ethan. Bella swallowed her bite and smiled at the little girl. "I'm Bella," she said. It was strange to say her name without the weight of her surname attached to it here. She wasn't Isabella Rhodes, the Rhodes of Rhodes Enterprises. She was just Bella, a woman with a flat tire, sharing a hot dog at a picnic table. "Where do you live, Bella?" Maya pressed on Ethan. Gave her a gentle look. Maya let the lady eat. Bella waved it off. "It's okay right now. I guess I live in my car," she said, which wasn't entirely untrue. Maya's eyes widened. "That's so cool, like a road trip," Ethan chuckled. "It's one way to put it." He looked at Bella, a question in his eyes, but he didn't voice it. He let her keep her story simple, and she was grateful for that. "I used to be a carpenter," he offered, changing the subject. "Had my own shop and everything but things changed. We've been on the road for a while now, looking for a new place to land." There was a whole story in that short explanation, a story of loss and resilience, and Bella felt the edges of it without needing to hear the details. It made her own reasons for being on the road feel selfish and small. She had run from too much while he was running towards something, anything that looked like a future for his daughter. "What kind of things did you make?" Maya asked her curiosity. "Endless furniture cabinets, sometimes little things, toys." Ethan's voice softened for a moment. "He made a wooden bird for Maya once, carved it from a single piece of oak. It had wings that actually moved." He paused, a shadow passing over his face. "We lost it a few months back during one of our moves." Maya's face fell. "I named him Pip," she said quietly. Bella's heart gave a small, painful twist. She knew what it felt like to lose the one thing that reminded you of a better time, a time before the world got complicated and heavy. She looked from the father to the daughter and saw the same quiet strength, the same unspoken grief, and she felt a connection to them that was as terrifying as it was undeniable. After dinner, as the stars began to poke through the dark canvas of the sky like tiny pinpricks of light, Ethan started to clean up. He wiped down the table with a wet cloth and packed the cooler with a quiet efficiency that spoke of long practice. Bella offered to help, but he just shook his head and gave her a small smile. "You're the guest," he said. "Your only job is to make sure Maya doesn't try to climb a tree in the dark." Maya, who was now lying on her back on the picnic table bench, was tracing the constellations with her finger. "Do you know any of their names?" she asked Bella, looking up at the sky. Bella lay back on the bench beside her, the rough wood pressing into her back, and pointed a finger toward a bright cluster of stars. "That's the Big Dipper," she said. "And that one over there is Orion's Belt. My dad taught me their names when I was a little girl." We used to have a telescope on the roof of our building. She spoke without thinking, the memory slipping out before she could stop it. She rarely spoke of her father, not the real one anyway. The one who existed before he became the chairman of the board, the one who had time for stars and stories. Maya looked at her, her head tilted. "Do you miss him?" Bella was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I do." Ethan paused his work, listening from the edge of their small circle of light. He didn't interrupt, he just let the quiet moment hang in the air, a fragile confession shared under a blanket of stars. He could sense the story. Bella wasn't telling the life she was carefully omitting from her narrative. But he also sensed her loneliness. It was a familiar feeling, a quiet companion on his own journey. He finished packing and came to stand by the table, looking down at the two of them. "It's getting late," he said gently. "We should probably get some sleep." Maya sat up reluctantly, but he didn't argue. She gave Bella a quick, shy hug that caught Bella completely off guard. "Thank you for showing me the stars," she said. Bella hugged her back, her arms closing around the small, warm body. It was the first genuine hug she'd had in years, and it almost broke her goodnight. "Bella." She watched as Ethan tucked Maya into the back of the minivan, pulling a thick blanket up to her chin. He spoke to her in a low murmur, his voice a soft rumble of comfort and love. Bella felt like an intruder, watching such an intimate, private moment. But she couldn't look away. When Ethan closed the minivan door, he turned back to Bella, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You can take my chair," he offered. "I'll be fine in the van." Bella shook her head. "I couldn't. It's your only one." He didn't argue, he just nodded. And for a moment they stood in the silence, caught between the world of a sleeping child and the vast, lonely darkness of the highway. It was a strange and unexpected truce, a moment of shared humanity on a road that was designed to keep people apart. The night grew colder, a deep, still cold that settled into your bones. The fire had burned down to a pile of glowing embers, casting a soft orange light on their faces. Ethan had ended up taking the camp chair, after all, pulling it closer to the dying fire, while Bella had retreated to her car. She had offered him a blanket from her trunk, a thick cashmere, one that probably cost more than his entire wardrobe, but he had politely refused, saying his jacket was enough. They sat in a comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds, the chirping of crickets and the distant rumble of a passing truck. It was a silence filled with unspoken questions and shared understanding, a fragile peace that neither of them wanted to break. "So you're really looking for a new place to settle down?" Bella asked, her voice quiet from the open window of her car. Ethan nodded, staring into the embers. "Anywhere that's quiet, has good schools, and maybe a place where a man can make a living with his hands." "Sounds nice," she said, a hint of wistfulness in her tone. "What about you?" he asked, turning to look at her. "What are you looking for?" Bella was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not sure anymore," she admitted. "I thought I was looking for freedom, but maybe I was just looking for a reason to stop running." There was a vulnerability in her voice that he hadn't heard before, a crack in the polished armor she wore so well. He didn't press her for details. He knew what it was like to carry a past you didn't want to talk about. Instead, he changed the subject. "Maya's a great kid," he said, his voice full of a quiet pride that was almost tangible. "She's been through a lot, but she's got a strong heart. She gets that from her dad," Bella said softly. Ethan looked away, a faint flush creeping up his neck. He wasn't used to compliments. He wasn't used to people seeing him at all. Really, he was the kind of man who moved through the world, quietly fixing things, keeping his head down, getting by. This woman with her expensive car and her sad, beautiful eyes saw him in a way that was both unnerving and deeply comforting. The fire popped, a single spark flying up into the darkness before extinguishing itself. "It's getting late," Ethan said. "Finally, I should probably try to get some sleep before Maya wakes up." "With the sun?" Bella nodded. Of course, thank you again for dinner and for the tire, and for not being a serial killer, she added, with a small smile he chuckled at. That any time he stood up and stretched his back aching from the long day, he hesitated for a second, then walked over to her car window. "Good night, Bella," he said. Their eyes met in the dim light, and for a fleeting moment, the distance between their two worlds seemed to disappear. There was just a man and a woman. Two lonely souls, who had found a moment of connection on a deserted stretch of highway. "Good night, Ethan," she whispered back, watching him as he retreated to his minivan and settled into the driver's seat for the night. Bella didn't sleep much. She just sat in her car staring out at the stars and wondering what it would feel like to have a place to call home. The morning broke with a soft gray light that filtered through the pine trees, casting long shadows across the pine. Dew-kissed gravel. Ethan woke with a crick in his neck from sleeping in the driver's seat, a familiar ache that had become a part of his daily routine. He sat up and stretched, rubbing his tired eyes, and looked out the window. Bella's car was still there, a sleek silver shape in the early morning mist. For a moment, he felt a strange sense of relief, a quiet happiness that she hadn't disappeared in the night, but then a wave of reality washed over him. This wasn't sustainable. This was a temporary stop, a brief intersection of two very different paths. He couldn't get attached. He couldn't let Maya get attached. He had to keep moving. That was the rule he had made for himself. A rule designed to protect them from more heartache. Maya was still asleep in the back, a peaceful lump under a pile of blankets. He slipped out of the van quietly and started the small stove to boil water for coffee. A few minutes later, the door to Willard. Bella's car opened, and she stepped out. She was wearing the same clothes as yesterday, but her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked less like a polished executive, and more like a woman who had spent a long night thinking. "Coffee?" he asked, holding up the kettle. She nodded and walked over her movements, slow and deliberate. She looked tired. Her eyes held a new kind of sadness, a resignation that hadn't been there the night before. He handed her a mug, and they stood in silence for a moment, watching the steam curl up into the cool morning air. "I should probably get going," she said finally, her voice quiet. "I need to get this tire replaced." He nodded. "That's a good idea. Oak Ridge is about an hour east. You can't miss it." She took a sip of her coffee, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I don't know what to say," she said after a moment. "Thank you. Feels too small." It was nothing, he said, though they both knew it wasn't. Maya stirred in the back of the van and sat up, her hair a tangled mess, her eyes still full of sleep. She saw Bella, and her face broke into a wide smile. "You're still here," she said, scrambling to the front of the van. Bella's own smile was a little sad but genuine. "I am. But I have to leave soon." Maya's face fell. "But you just got here." "I know, sweetheart, but I have to get my car fixed," Bella said gently. Maya looked at her father, her eyes pleading. "Can't we go with her? We could have breakfast in the town." Ethan's heart clenched. He saw the hope in his daughter's eyes, the easy connection she had formed with this woman, and it terrified him. "Maya," he started, but Bella cut him off gently. "That's a nice offer, but I think your dad has plans of his own." She knelt down and looked Maya in the eye. "It was really nice to meet you. You're a very special girl." Maya gave her a hug, a quick, tight embrace that lingered for a moment too long when she pulled away. Bella's eyes were suspiciously bright. She stood up and met Ethan's gaze, her expression a mixture of regret and unspoken words. "Take care of yourself, Ethan," she said. He just nodded. "You too." And with that, she got into her car, started the engine, and drove away. This time she didn't look back. Ethan stood there watching until the silver car was just a speck in the distance. A part of him felt a profound sense of relief. The danger had passed, the complication was gone, but another part of him, an older, quieter part, felt a familiar ache, the ache of letting something good go because he was too afraid to hold on to it. The drive to Oak Ridge felt longer than an hour. The silence in the minivan was thick with unspoken words. Maya was quiet in the back seat, her notebook open, but the crayons untouched. She just stared out the window, watching the trees blur by a sad little soldier guarding a silent grief. Ethan tried to start a conversation a few times, but his words fell flat, lost in the hum of the engine. He felt a growing sense of guilt, a heavy weight in his chest. He had done the right thing. He told himself he had protected his daughter from a fleeting connection, from the inevitable disappointment of a person who was just passing through. But as he glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror, he saw the same sadness he felt in his own heart. Maybe he hadn't protected her at all. Maybe he had just taught her that good things don't last. They reached the small town of Oak Ridge just before noon. It was a quaint place with a main street lined with brick buildings and a town square with a gazebo at its center. Ethan found the garage easily, a small family-run operation with a friendly mechanic who promised to have a new tire for the silver car. In a few hours while they waited, he took Maya to a small diner for lunch. The place was warm and smelled of coffee and fried bacon, but Maya just picked at her grilled cheese. Appetite gone. Ethan watched her, his own food tasting like sawdust. He had to fix this. He had to do something to bring the light back to her eyes. After lunch, they wandered down Main Street looking in the shop windows. That's when he saw it. In the window of a small antique store tucked between a hardware store and a bakery was a small wooden bird. It was carved from a dark wood, its wings outstretched, as if in mid-flight. It wasn't the same as the one he had made for her years ago, but it was close, so close. It made his heart ache. He stopped in front of the window, his breath catching in his throat. Maya followed his gaze, and her eyes widened. "Pip," she whispered, her voice full of a sudden fragile hope. Looks just like him. Ethan's mind raced. He knew he shouldn't. He didn't have the money to spare. Every dollar was accounted for, but the look on his daughter's face, the first spark of real joy he had seen all day, was something he couldn't ignore. "Come on," he said, taking her hand. "Let's go inside." The bell above the door chimed as they entered the shop, and the old woman behind the counter looked up and smiled. It was a small price to pay, he thought, for a piece of his daughter's happiness back, and maybe, just maybe, a piece of his own atonement for letting another good thing fly away. Bella sat in the waiting room of the garage in Oak Ridge, the smell of rubber and old coffee filling the air. She stared at the faded magazine on the table in front of her, not really seeing it. Her mind was miles away back at the rest stop, replaying the morning's goodbye over and over. She had done the right thing walking away. It was cleaner, safer for everyone. But it felt wrong. It felt like she had run away again. Not from her past, but from a possible future. She had told herself that Ethan was right. She was a complication, a disruption to the quiet life he was trying to build for his daughter. But as she sat there in the sterile silence of the waiting room, she realized that maybe quiet wasn't what she wanted anymore. Maybe she wanted messy and complicated and real. A voice from the doorway startled her. "Miss Rhodes, your car is ready." She looked up the mechanic. A kind-faced man with grease-stained hands was smiling at her. She stood up, paid the bill, and walked out to her car. The new tire was black and sturdy, a perfect match for the others. It was as if the flat had never happened, as if the last 24 hours were just a strange dream. But it wasn't a dream, it was a choice, a fork in the road, and she had taken the path that led back to her old life of loneliness and isolation. She got in the car and started the engine, her hands gripping the wheel. She could keep driving east, head back to the city, face the music deal with the fallout of her disappearance. Or she could do something else, something reckless and illogical and terrifyingly hopeful. She thought of Maya's hug, the warmth of her small arms around her neck. She thought of Ethan's smile, the way it softened, the tired lines around his eyes. She thought of the stars and the hot dogs and the quiet understanding that had passed between them. Without a single word, she pulled out of the garage and turned onto Main Street. She didn't know what she was looking for. She just knew she had to look, and then she saw them. They were coming out of a small antique shop. Their heads bent together over a small object in Ethan's hands. Maya was smiling, a real genuine smile that lit up her whole face, and Ethan, he was looking at his daughter with a love so fierce and tender it made Bella's heart ache. She pulled the car over to the curb and watched them. Her breath caught in her throat. She couldn't leave. Not now. Not when she had just found the one thing she had been searching for all along, a reason to stay. Ethan didn't see her. At first he was too focused on the small wooden bird in his hand and the look of pure joy on his daughter's face. He had spent the last of their grocery money on it. A reckless and impractical decision. But as he watched Maya cradle the rard bird in her hands, whispering to it as if it were an old friend, he knew he had made the right choice. It was more than just a toy. It was a piece of their past, a symbol of a time before the world had become so heavy. It was hope, carved from wood. They were walking back toward the minivan when he heard a car door open, and close behind them, he turned, and his heart stopped. Bella stood on the sidewalk a few feet away, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat. Her expression, a mixture of nervousness and determination. She had come back for a moment. Neither of them spoke. They just stood there, on the quiet main street of a small town, the world seeming to hold its breath around them. Maya was the first to break the pard. "Silence, Bella," she cried, running toward her and throwing her arms around her legs. Bella knelt down and hugged her tightly, her eyes closing for a moment as if to savor the feeling. Ethan walked toward them slowly, his mind racing. What did this mean? What did she want? Why had she come back? "I saw you from the garage," Bella said, her voice quiet as she stood up. "I was just leaving, but I couldn't." Ethan didn't say anything. He just looked at her, waiting. She took a deep breath. "I was wrong to leave," she said. "I was scared. I'm always scared, but running away isn't the answer. Not anymore." She looked at the wooden bird in Maya's hands, and a small, sad smile touched her lips. "You found him," she said. Maya beamed. "His name is Hope." Now Ethan's gaze met Bella's, and in that moment he understood she wasn't here to complicate his life. She was here because she was just as lost as he was, and maybe, just maybe, they could find their way together. "I don't know what this is," Bella said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't have a plan. I just know that I don't want to be alone anymore, and I don't want you to be either." She looked at him, her eyes pleading for him to understand, to believe her. And for the first time since his wife had died, Ethan felt a flicker of something he had thought was long extinguished, a tiny, fragile spark of hope. He looked at his daughter, who was now holding Bella's hand, as if she had always belonged there. He looked at the woman in front of him, who had everything and nothing at the same time. And he made a choice. He took a step forward and closed the distance between them. He didn't say a word. He just reached out and took her other hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers, a silent promise, a new beginning. The diner was small and cozy, the kind of place that had been serving the same comfort food for 50 years. The vinyl on 20 the booth seats was cracked, and the coffee was a little burnt, but it was warm and it was real. They sat in a corner, booth Maya tucked between them, a plate of half-eaten pancakes in front of her. She was happily drawing on a napkin a picture of a bird, a girl, and a woman with a silver car. Bella watched her, a soft smile on her face. She had taken off her expensive coat, and now sat in a simple sweater, looking more at home than she ever had in her own penthouse apartment. Ethan sipped his coffee, watching them both over the rim of his mug. The tension that had been between them had dissolved, replaced by a quiet, tentative peace. They were two strangers. Still, two people from different worlds. But they were no longer just passing through. They were sharing a meal, a moment, a fragile new beginning. "So what now?" Ethan asked, his voice low. Bella looked up from Maya's drawing, her eyes meeting his. "I don't know," she admitted. And for the first time that didn't scare her. "I have a house on "The coast a few hours from here," she said. "A place I bought years ago and never spent more than a weekend in. It's quiet. It's empty. It's a place to start." She hesitated, then continued, "I'm not asking you to come with me. I'm just saying it's there. If you want to see it," Ethan thought about the minivan, the endless road, the uncertainty of the next town and the next job. He looked at Maya, who was now holding up her drawing for Bella to admire, a proud smile on her face. He thought about the loneliness that had been his constant companion for so long. Maybe he said, a small smile touching his lips, "Maybe we could use a change of scenery." The waitress came by and refilled their coffees. She gave them a warm, knowing smile, the kind that people in small towns give when they see something good happening. They weren't a family. Not yet. They were just three people in a diner booth, a man who had lost his way, a woman who had run from hers, and a little girl who had a wooden bird named Hope. And as they sat there sharing a plate of pancakes and a quiet conversation, it felt like they were finally heading in the right direction. Home, the house, was not what Ethan had expected. He had pictured a modern glass box, a sterile monument to wealth and success, but the house that greeted them at the end of the long winding driveway was something else entirely. It was an old stone cottage covered in ivy, with a wide wooden porch and windows that looked out over the endless expanse of the ocean. It was a house with character, with history, with a soul. Bella unlocked the front door and pushed it open, revealing a room filled with dusty furniture covered in white sheets. The air was still and smelled of salt and old wood. It was a house that had been waiting a long time for someone to come home. "This is it," she said, her voice quiet, a little apologetic. "It's not much." Ethan walked into the Prombers' room. His boots echoing on the hardwood floors, he ran a hand over a dust-covered table, leaving a clean streak in his wake. "It's beautiful," he said, and he meant it. It was a house that a carpenter could appreciate. A house with good bones. A house that could be brought back to life. Maya ran through the rooms, her laughter echoing through the empty spaces. She found a small bedroom with a window seat that overlooked the ocean and immediately claimed it as her own. Bella watched her, a small smile on her face. "I bought this place on a whim years ago," she said. "I thought it would be my escape, but I never knew how to just be still. I was always running to the next thing, the next deal, the next success." Ethan looked at her. He saw the vulnerability in her eyes, the longing for a life she had never allowed herself to have. "Well," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "it looks like you've got a lot of work to do, and I know a good carpenter." She laughed, a real genuine laugh that filled the dusty room with a warmth it hadn't felt in years. "Maybe I do," she said, her eyes locking with his. They stood there for a long moment, the ocean roaring in the distance, the dust motes dancing. In the afternoon light, they weren't just in a house, they were on the edge of a new life, a life they could build together, from the ground up, one board, one nail, one shared hope at a time. The days that followed were a blur of work, laughter, and the quiet joy of building something new. Ethan threw himself into bringing the old cottage back to life, his hands rediscovering the familiar language of wood and tools. He sanded floors, repaired windows, built bookshelves. He was a man in his element, a craftsman with a purpose. Bella worked alongside him. She learned how to paint, how to spackle, how to use a power drill. She was clumsy at first, her movements unsure, but she was a quick learner, and she wasn't afraid of getting her hands dirty. She was shedding her old life like a second skin. The polished executive replaced by a woman with paint in her hair and a genuine smile on her face. Maya was their constant companion, a small whirlwind of energy and happiness. She helped carry tools, fetched water, and offered unsolicited design advice. She was thriving in the salty air and the steady rhythm of their new life. One evening, as the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the ocean, they sat on the porch, together drinking lemonade and watching the waves crash against the shore. The cottage was almost finished. The smell of fresh paint and sawdust lingering in the air. It was a home now, a real home, filled with warmth and love. And the promise of a future I never knew I could be. "This happy Bella," said her voice quiet, her head resting on Ethan's shoulder. He put his arm around her and pulled her close. "Me, neither," he said, his voice thick with emotion. They were two broken people who had found each other on a deserted highway, two lonely souls, who had dared to hope for something more. And in this quiet moment on this porch, overlooking the ocean, they had found it. They had found home the first time Bella's father called. She almost didn't answer. The name flashed on her screen, a stark reminder of the world she had left behind, a world of power and pressure, and the cold, empty echo of a name that had once defined her. She let it ring 3 times, her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs, before finally taking a breath and answering Isabella. Her father's voice was clipped, devoid of warmth. The same voice he used in board meetings when a deal was going south. "I'm here, Dad," she said, her own voice. Steady and calm. Surprising. Even herself. "We're having a board meeting next week. You will be there." It wasn't a request, it was a command, the kind she had spent her entire life obeying, but something had changed. She was no longer the dutiful daughter, the polished puppet who smiled on cue. "I don't think so," she said, her voice quiet but firm. There was a silence on the other end of the line, a silence so profound she could hear the crackle of static. "What did you say?" I said, "No, Dad. I'm not coming back." Her father's voice rose a notch, a rare crack in his iron facade. "Isabella, you have a responsibility, a duty to this company, to this family. I have a responsibility to myself now," she said, and, for the first time in her life, she believed it. She thought of Ethan, his steady hands and his kind eyes. She thought of Maya, her infectious laughter and her unwavering belief in hope. She thought of the life they were building together. Life of simple joys and honest work. A life that was real, in a way that her old one had never been. "I'm happy here, Dad," she said, her voice softening. "I'm finally happy." There was another long pause on the other end of the line, and when her father spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, laced with a reluctant understanding. "I see," he said, and then he hung up. Bella stood on the porch looking out at the ocean, a sense of peace settling over her like a warm blanket. She had finally done it. She had finally chosen herself, her own happiness, her own life. And she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her soul that she had made the right choice. She was no longer Isabella Rhodes, the heiress, the executive, the woman in the silver car. She was just Bella, a woman who had found her way home. The letter arrived on a sunny afternoon tucked into the mailbox. At the end of their long winding driveway, it was addressed to Ethan in a crisp, elegant script that he recognized. Immediately he opened it with a sense of trepidation, a small knot of fear tightening in his stomach. The letter was from a law firm in the city, a formal document with a lot of legal jargon that he didn't understand. But one phrase stood out, a phrase that made his blood run cold, a cease and desist. Order it was from Rhodes Enterprises, Bella's family's company. It accused him of undue influence, of taking advantage of an emotionally vulnerable woman, of isolating her from her family and her responsibilities. It was a declaration of war, a thinly veiled threat designed to scare him away, to make him run. Ethan stood there on the driveway, the letter trembling in his hand. All the old fears, the old insecurities came rushing back. He was a nobody, a small-town carpenter who had stumbled into a world he didn't belong in. He had no money, no power, no way to fight a corporate giant like Rhodes Enterprises. He walked back to the house, his heart a heavy stone in his chest. Bella was in the garden with Maya planting flowers, their laughter carrying on the breeze. He didn't want to show her the letter. He didn't want to bring the ugliness of her old world into the beautiful new one they had built together. But he knew he had to. They were a team now, a family, and they would face this together. Bella read the letter, her face a mask of cold fury. She had seen this tactic before. It was her father's signature, move a calculated strike designed to intimidate and control. But she was not the same woman she had been months ago. She was no longer a pawn in his game. She was a queen, and she would protect her king and her princess with everything she had. She looked at Ethan, his face pale with worry, and took his hand. "It's okay," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "We're going to fight this, and we're going to win, because we have something they don't. We have love. And that's a power they can't buy, or bully, or break." And as they stood there hand in hand with the ocean roaring behind them and their daughter's laughter in the air, Ethan knew she was right. They were not just a carpenter and an heiress, they were a family, and they were unbreakable. The boardroom was cold and sterile, the air thick with the scent of money and power. Bella sat at the head of the long, polished table, her hands folded in front of her, her posture regal and unyielding. She was dressed in a simple but elegant dress, a stark contrast to the dark suits of the men who sat around her. Her father sat at the opposite end of the table, his face a thunderous mask of disapproval. "This is a waste of time." "Isabella," he said, his voice a low growl, "you are making a mockery of this family, of this company." Bella met his gaze, her eyes clear and steady. "No, Dad," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound confidence, "you are the one who has made a mockery of this family. You have traded love for power and compassion for control. You have tried to bully and intimidate the best man I have ever known, a man who has more integrity in his little finger than all of you have in this entire room." She stood up, her chair scraping softly against the marble floor. "I am not the same woman who left here months ago. I am not afraid of you anymore. I am not your puppet. I am not your pawn. I am a woman in love, a woman who has found her voice and her strength. And I will not be silenced." A murmur went through the room, the board members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. They had never seen her like this, so bold, so defiant, so powerful. She was no longer the quiet, dutiful daughter. She was a force to be reckoned with. "I am here today to tender my resignation," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "I am leaving Rhodes Enterprises, and I am taking my shares with me. I am starting a new company, a company that will be built on the values that you have forgotten, on kindness and compassion and the belief that people are more important than profits." Her father's face was a mixture of shock and anger and a reluctant flicker of pride. He had raised a fighter, and she had finally found a battle worth fighting. She turned and walked out of the boardroom, her head held high, leaving behind a room full of stunned silence and the echo of a new era. Beginning, she was no longer Isabella Rhodes, the heiress she was Bella, a woman who had fought for her love and won the workshop, was filled with the smell of sawdust and fresh paint, the sound of Ethan's saw buzzing in a steady rhythm. A symphony of creation. Bella walked in carrying a tray with 2 mugs of coffee and a plate of cookies she had baked that morning. She was wearing jeans and a faded t-shirt, her hair tied back in a messy bun. She looked happy. She looked free. Ethan turned off the saw and smiled at her, taking a mug of coffee and a cookie. "What's the occasion?" he asked. She grinned. "No occasion, just celebrating what our new life," she said, her eyes shining. She told him about the board meeting, about her resignation, about her plans for a new company. A company that would invest in small businesses, in artisans, in people like him who were trying to make the world a more beautiful place, one creation at a time. Ethan listened, his heart swelling with pride and love. He had always known she was strong, but he had never seen her like this, so confident, so passionate, so alive. "I have a name for the company," she said, her eyes sparkling. "Rhodes Woodworks, a partnership, a legacy, a new beginning." Ethan pulled her into his arms and kissed her, a deep and passionate kiss that spoke of all the words they didn't need to say. They were no longer two people from different worlds. They were two halves of a whole, a team, a family, and they were ready to build their placage future together, one piece of wood, one shared dream at a time. The sun was setting over the ocean, casting a warm, golden glow over the small stone cottage. Maya was on the porch, her head bent in concentration as she worked on a new drawing. It was using a set of professional-grade colored pencils, a gift from Bella. Her little fingers moved with a newfound confidence, a budding artist in the making. Ethan and Bella sat on the porch, swinged their hands, intertwined their shoulders, touching, watching their daughter with a quiet sense of awe and gratitude. Their life was not what either of them had planned or expected. It was better. It was a life filled with love and laughter and the simple joy of being together. They had faced their demons, their fears, their pasts, and they had emerged stronger, more resilient, more in love than ever before. The old minivan was gone, replaced by a sturdy pickup truck that Ethan used for his new business, a business that was thriving. Thanks to a partnership with Bella's new company, the cottage was no longer a dusty, forgotten house. It was a home, a sanctuary, a place where they could be themselves and love each other freely and openly. Maya looked up from her drawing, her eyes shining with pride. She held it up for them to see. It was a picture of the three of them standing in front of the cottage. A big red heart drawn around them. Above the heart she had written 2 words, "Are forever." Bella's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the drawing. It was a perfect representation of their life, a life that had been born from a flat tire on a deserted highway, a life that had been built on kindness and compassion and the unwavering belief in the power of love. She leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder, and he kissed the top of her head, his heart full to bursting. They had come a long way from that lonely rest stop. They had found their way home to each other and to themselves, and they knew with a certainty that settled deep in their souls that their forever had just begun. The light in the workshop was soft and golden, the late afternoon sun streaming through the large windows and illuminating the fine particles of sawdust dancing in the air. The room smelled of cedar and varnish and the quiet satisfaction of a day's work well done. Ethan stood at his workbench sanding a piece of rich, dark walnut, his hands moving with the familiar grace of a master craftsman. The wood was for a cradle, a special commission for a new family in the village down the coast. His business, Rhodes Woodworks, had become a quiet success, not because of any grand marketing scheme, but through word of mouth. People were drawn to the quality of his work, the honesty of his designs, the story of the man who built beautiful things with his hands and his heart. Bella walked in a soft smile on her face. She was carrying a small bundle wrapped in a soft white blanket. She came to stand beside him, her hip brushing against his, as she looked down at the cradle. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He stopped his sanding and looked at her, at the love in her eyes, at the peaceful contentment that had settled on her like a second skin. She was a different woman from the one he had met on that lonely highway. The fear and the sadness had been replaced by a quiet confidence, a radiant joy. He reached out and touched the baby's cheek, a small, perfect finger curling around his own. He had never thought he would find love again. He had never thought he would. "I have another child, but life had a funny way of surprising you, of giving you the very thing you thought you had lost forever." Maya now, a bright and curious 10-year-old, came skipping into the workshop, her pigtails bouncing. She had her sketchbook in her hand, a constant companion. These days she was a talented artist, her drawings full of life and color and a wisdom beyond her years. She came to stand beside them and looked down at her baby brother, a wide grin spreading across her face. "Can I hold him?" she asked. Ethan nodded and carefully placed the baby in her arms. She held him with a gentle reverence, a big sister's love, already in full bloom. This was their life, their family, their happily ever after. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real, and it was theirs. And as they stood there, in the golden light of the workshop, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and the warmth of their love, they knew that they had built something truly lasting. something truly beautiful. Something that would stand the test of time, a legacy of love, carved from the heart. The years passed in a blur of happy moments and quiet triumphs. Rhodes, Woodworks, grew into a respected brand, known for its quality craftsmanship and its commitment to ethical practices. Bella's new company flourished, investing in small businesses and community projects, making a real difference in the world. They had become a power couple, not in the traditional sense of wealth and influence, but in the sense of love and partnership, and a shared vision for a better world. Maya grew into a talented young woman, her art gaining recognition and acclaim. She went off to a prestigious art school on a full scholarship, a testament to her talent and her parents' unwavering support. Their son grew into a kind and curious boy. With his father's hands and his mother's eyes, he spent his days in the workshop learning the craft of woodworking from his father, his laughter echoing through the sawdust-filled air, a constant reminder of the joy that had filled their lives. Ethan and Bella grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They were a team, a partnership, a love story for the ages. They had faced their share of challenges. Of course, life was never without its storms, but they had always faced them together, hand in hand, their love a steady anchor in the turbulent seas of life. One sunny afternoon, as they sat on the porch of their stone cottage, watching their grandchildren play on the beach, Bella turned to Ethan, her eyes shining with tears of gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. He looked at her, a quizzical smile on his face. "For what?" "For everything," she said. "For the flat tire, for the hot dog, for the wooden bird, for showing me what it means to be truly loved." He took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. A familiar comfort, a silent promise. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. For coming back, she leaned her head on his shoulder and they sat in a comfortable silence, watching the waves crash against the shore, their hearts full of a love that was as vast and as timeless as the ocean itself. Their story was a testament to the power of kindness, of compassion, of the belief that love can conquer all. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures are not found in boardrooms or bank accounts, but in the simple, quiet moments of human connection on a deserted stretch of highway, on a porch overlooking the ocean, in the heart of a family built on love and hope and the unwavering belief in a forever that was real and true, and theirs alone. The old wooden bird sat on the mantelpiece, a silent guardian of their love story. Its wings were worn smooth from years of being held by small hands, its paint faded from the sun, but its spirit was as strong as ever. It was a symbol of their journey, a reminder of the hope that had brought them together, and the love that had kept them there. It was a testament to the fact that sometimes the most beautiful things are not the ones that are perfect, but the ones that are real and true and full of love. And as long as the birds sat on the mantelpiece, their love story would continue, a timeless tale of a carpenter, an heiress, and a love that was built to last forever. The final scene is a close-up of the wooden bird. The camera slowly pulls back to reveal the entire family sitting in front of the fireplace, laughing and talking, their faces glowing in the warm light of the fire. The camera continues to pull back, showing the cottage, the ocean, the endless sky. A final voiceover from an older, wiser Maya says, "Some people find love in grand gestures and fairy tale endings. My parents found it on the side of a lonely road with a flat tire and a fromosums hot dog. They taught me that the greatest love stories are not the ones that are written in the stars, but the ones that are built by hand with kindness, compassion, and the courage to believe in a forever that is as real and as beautiful." A simple wooden bird. The screen fades to black, leaving the audience with a feeling of warmth, hope, and the belief that true love can be found in the most unexpected of places.